Quick thought, FX markets. Right, so I'm doing a lot more of my content premium only for my Basecamp guys and only going to do delayed clips on the deep detail of FX. But I'm still going to be loving you guys on the channel, and I've got a thought for you. And as I've shared this one already live as it broke, the EURNOK is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to continue this narrative while it's live with you. I've just had a thought. So this is pure speculation, and it's pure speculation on my own side. We're looking at a situation where I deeply believe on balance of probabilities, or I deeply feel, I don't want to use that word believe, I deeply feel on balance of probabilities the Eurozone currency is in massive stress, and that there's probably immense amount happening behind the scenes at the moment. If you haven't watched my previous clips, that's it. I don't want to go into that. And the key interest for me is, where does the flows out of the euro in the event of all that we expect to transpire go to? Now, traditionally, that's gone to the Swiss franc, and we've had three or at least two major spills from the 1.5 zone all the way down, and then we've had again when the 1.2 zone fell. So the 1.5 zone almost touched parity and rallied, then was held again at the 1.2 zone, and then spilled again with the floor being walked away from. So we were intricately involved on both of those. But the EURNOK has become an interesting trade for me because it has potentially a massive amount of downside. It's churned for a small bit at our major confluence of levels that we expected, so it's performed very well. It broke, it's run, it's churned a little bit at the confluence levels for a while, and now it's back spilling. It's starting to have the look of it on the chart side that it's letting go. It's letting go of the key area of confluence, and will start to make further downside. So what does this mean? Could it mean the krona seems to be one of the most powerful? Now, I know from other material that I read, and this is where fundamentals can be very, very useful with technicals. In terms of the Norwegian government, in terms of if you're looking for offshore banking, for example, and you want a really non-indebted government nation and a non-indebted choice of banks, one of the best places to go is Norway. So people typically go to Hong Kong, Norway. Now, we know there's a relationship with China with Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has separate banks, so it's held in quite high esteem. Singapore's held in quite a high esteem. When you're looking at both governments' situation and their levels of indebtedness, and then individual leading banks and the general banking system as a whole, there's not very many places that score really highly on both those categories, and Norway is one. And I mentioned two others. You can go do your research on others. I have a research document that I will be sharing with my premium guys that has all those particulars and details in greater level of detail, and it's something for you to be thinking about as your financial prepperdom. So you really need to be asking these questions personally all the time. Where is the safest country, both as a legal system, both as a government's level of indebtedness, and a bank's? But that's kind of a separate discussion. But please park that thread in your mind, because I want you to be able to succeed and save yourself. But you're going to have to do more of the lifting on your own, unless you're in the premium area. Now, on the EURNOK trade, if that is falling and it's going to be the outperformer for now, does the question then beg that the Swiss franc is actively intervening, as it has done every time, including the first time? The floor is obviously an act of intervention, but actually most people don't realize, and I was doing the charting, I could see where they were intervening right up at 1.5. Then when it fell, the next level, they held a line and it fell. Then they said, one of these days we're going to intervene, and it caused a pop in the market that was temporary and fizzled back down and went even lower still. And that was way up at the 140s, in the low 140s. So that was just trying to jaw the market. We were already hoovering up loads of euros. So what we do know is that the Swiss National Bank has done a job on there. Now, I still think that there's going to be a chance and that there will be capitulation. And for many, Pavlovian responses are the traditional EU banker of last resort is still Switzerland. So in the event that things get deeply disorderly on the euro unraveling, we will have a situation where the Swiss will still once again be strong. But I wonder, as these decisions that the Swiss are making with regards, they may be taking some of the shine off, and because they're non-economic decisions to buy a currency at an overvalued. At the end of the day, that's a non-economic decision. Don't overpay for something to try hold something up. It's just a bad idea because obviously it wants to go down, and that means you could be buying it for cheaper. So if you're doing a commercial decision, that doesn't fall into the category of commercial. That falls into the category of government overreach and interventionism, and that should be rejected by every citizen. Nothing wasteful. Don't hold back the tide of free market forces. But they will continue to try and be godlike, and that's what they do. And they'll continue to be taught the lessons that go with it. But in the meantime, Norway is not on any actively known level doing an immense amount of buying of the euro. They're a small nation relative, so Switzerland, but Norway is smaller still in terms of scale. Yes, they do trade with them, but they do trade more globally as well. It's not on the basis of the oil being in an absolute ripper runaway market. So why is the krona going up? Maybe at that global level, because the Swiss banks are in a dire state. Many of the Swiss banks are in a dire state. So remember the test I started to put you. If we now go for the full reset, which is no longer about government responsibility and trade balances and surpluses, it now starts to involve a banking system as well. You know, some of the dumbest money, while was the German banks and the Swiss banks, with the subprime. They were still buying up on the other side of the pond when the Americans that had created the toxic debt had realized that they'd got a wee bit too much and were unloading it. The dumb money on the other side that didn't know the crack and hadn't an inside on the massive amount of CDOs, just recarving them and re-rating them as AAA. It's like taking a pile of poo and then baking it and cooking it and then feeding it as a biscuit and expecting it to be any better tasting. But they successfully sold those biscuits to the European banks and they gobbled them up. And now their stomach is giving them the indigestion they deserve. So the Swiss banking system, I'm afraid to say that UBS and a number of others have been often at the forefront in terms of these asset classes. So if they have a bank failure, even relatively to being quite a strong government with good trades surpluses and being outside of the euro, which banks do you choose for your money? That's not to say all Swiss banks are bad, but some of the leading bulge bracket ones were right in the thick of the problems. So Norway becomes attractive because the Norwegian banks largely weren't actively involved in the subprime and all this. This was very much a creation of the super zones, both US and Europe. I mean, many of the peripheral and the emerging market banks were passed by for that. I mean, South African banks were really stable. They didn't buy subprime. Generally, New Zealand banks, you know, they weren't big players at the trough of eating the crap biscuits that were carved CDO, subprime mortgages to people with nothing but social welfare checks and a step-up mortgage in 2 years' time that they could never afford. So they weren't feeding on that. So this brings those countries into potential view. And I think that there's something driving the EURNOK trade that is beyond just a simple commodity trade. The oil isn't exceedingly strong, and we have to start thinking fundamentally about these things such as flight capital and where are the safest banks? Where do you want to put your credits? When they're just digits, like digits on your car odometer reading. They just and not even that. They're electronic versions of that in the ether of a banking system. Where do you want to go with a legal system, with a sound government, and a sound banking system? This is the big thought. And where does that German largesse, which is coming in those trade balances, go? Where do the Greeks that have stifled money under cushion and pillar and had bank accounts in Europe, where does that money want to go that wants to go safe? It looks like the Norwegian krona is pretty strong. And remember, the dollar is the other side of the pond. It feels a far away for many Europeans. Yes, it has a sort of binary relationship, and I expect the dollar to get stronger. But I wouldn't always say that for everyone it's the comfort place. And the American banks are known to have many concerns on their own. So the big no-go zones being like Citibank, Bank of America, some of them have been pushed through tests. Wells Fargo was once the best, and now they've had major issues come out. So even their shiny knights of the realm have been found out. So all interesting. A little bit of speculation on my behalf. Nothing to prove this. All I'm saying is what's driving the krona and what's driving the euro Norwegian krona in terms of that loss of value. Are we hiding the loss in the euro by all the majors having turns and weakening themselves, but some of the smaller peripheral nations with strong banking systems, strong debt situations, and good libertarian personal self-determination legal structures getting a bid now. Okay, that's all from me. Hope you enjoy that little ponderous point of speculation. Go do your research on solid banks, solid governments, and places to keep your digits in the ether. Bye for now.